So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and to that most rarest of occurrences, because this is a battle that I was actually in for once. So, yeah, should be, well, at least I know exactly what happened in this fight, so I know more or less what to be looking for, and hopefully I won't miss out on any of the important aspects that happened in this fight. It is also a themed battle, with the good kingdoms of Arnor trying to defend their land, with 3 Cardolan and 1 Arthedain army on the defence, and the evil forces in the area with 2 Angmar and 2 Rhudaur armies trying to wrest this settlement away from them. And I'm sure that there is a settlement name that I can use for this. I'm certain that I haven't used up all of the settlement names in the past of the Arnorian towns and such. Arnor is a fairly big place after all, even if most of the areas are not of great import, but nonetheless I'm on the attacking team today and I'm playing as everyone's favourite team that they love to hate, which is Angmar. But we'll get on to me in just a moment. We'll start off with one of my allies over here who's going to be marching along this coastline. So Rhudaur and Angmar are a good... well, actually, before we get underway, a quick note on the map. We will of course be going through this, but this was made by Eclipse 2500, so big thank you to him for letting me get involved in this one. Cityscapes, I've noticed, tend to be divided between 2 things primarily. One is rather flat and based around their choke points. This one is based around the choke points as well, but this one, the defence comes more from the elevation more so than the fortifications. And that is certainly going to be the case here. So we're going to have to slog through areas where the enemy have got a significant vantage point on us, which is also offering them really good angles as we try to move through the defence. So there's really going to be no avoiding the fact that we're going to be taking a lot of damage, which is more of a problem for the Rhudaur elements of our attack than it is for the Angmar ones, because Angmar are kind of built to be able to withstand this kind of punishment a little bit more so than Rhudaur, of course, but that's where having both of these 2 armies will come in very handy. It's a pretty big cityscape as well. It's kind of sprawling, it's not too dense, so there's plenty of areas that could sprout action in this fight. But as I was about to get into, we will start off with the Rhudaur army over here under the command of Mevin that's going to be marching down the coast. Now there are a few little stipulations. One is that we couldn't bring any more than 1 Witcher per Angmar army. The other is that there was a total team cap of 4 artillery pieces, I believe, for the attackers. So 2 of which Mevin is going to bring, 1 catapult and 1 ballista. So in a siege, this isn't necessarily the worst thing in the world for Rhudaur to do. A lot of Rhudaur's damage dealing is going to come from their hard-hitting ranged units, be they javelins, axe throwers, or in this case, Mevin punting for some artillery. The catapult and the ballista could be really useful if they can get into the right position. The ballista could be a little bit more compromised by angles, but the catapult, regardless really of the situation, is going to be something that at the very least the defenders are going to be worried about, which could force them to either make mistakes or just straight up get flattened by artillery fire. We've got some Ettenmoor's troll hunters here. Very unsurprising to see them, given the fact that we're going to be having to deal with factions that have got plenty of units of ranged firepower, of which the slightly better armour values of the Ettenmoor's troll hunters will be good at mitigating, at least in comparison to their fellows from Rhudaur. But the main thing, of course, is the fact that they offer an armour-piercing missile, which is very, very important when it comes to cracking through those defences for Rhudaur, who are going to need to straight up out-damage their opponents, especially in Mevin's case over here, because he's going to be largely on his own. I'm going to be sending some cavalry to help him out, but generally speaking, the bulk of the hard work over here on this coastline here is going to have to be done by him, so he's going to have to out-damage the enemy in a big way. Rhudaur clansmen make up the tankier centre of the Rhudaur main line, with their big shield values. The armour upgrade as well can help them there, but they are still spears, so that spear malice is going to be a little bit of a problem when it comes to dealing damage quickly. More Ettenmoor's troll hunters and more Rhudaur clansmen in and amongst things over here. Very important unit is going to be the Arthedain pikemen, because of their ability to tie together the Rhudaur line quite nicely. And contrary to a lot of the other Rhudaur units, are actually tankier than most equivalent pikes because of that shield that they have, so it mitigates that problem that pikes often have when it comes to trying to deal with missile units. Arthedain berserkers, they've got a few armour-piercing missiles, which are pretty savage, but they don't have that many of them. But then, of course, they're also a fantastic armour-piercing 2 HP bodyguard unit in melee as well, and there are 104 of them, so they're a pretty good multifaceted unit overall. And then a little bit further back, we've got a couple of units of Rhudaur swordsmen just to pad out the numbers a bit. The rest of his army is going to be hidden, of course. There's going to be some trollshore axe throwers, there's going to be some other hidden elements as well, of which we can't see, but they will make themselves known throughout the battle. Then we have my army, so I can actually talk about my thought process a little bit. We won't spend too long dwelling on the army composition. So, warg skirmishers. I didn't really know what kind of map we were going to be on. I didn't know whether it was going to be really open or really constricted, so I wasn't sure what to do in terms of cavalry presence, but I figured Warg skirmishers are going to be useful regardless, because if nothing else, they're going to be useful for their javelins, and if it does turn out that we need a little bit of mobility, a little bit of anti-cavalry, the Warg skirmishers can fill that niche quite nicely as well. So I'm going to be sending them along the coastline with Mevin, because there's a little bit more space to work with here. The rest of my army is going to be going through the rather tight confines of the front area of the settlement, along with Medexa, who is the other Rhudaur army. So we're going to be going into the meat grinder together. So we're going to draw a lot of the defensive attention, but like I said, that's going to be more of a potential problem for him, because Rhudaur are going to be a little bit more responsible for doing the intricate damage dealing work, whereas me as Angmar, all I really need to do is attempt to break the face, or attempt to break the enemy lines with my face, basically. So Witch Realm Scourge Raiders, an axe thrower unit here, so another potential damage dealer that we have. Need to be very careful about getting them too close to arrow fire though. One unit of Gundabad Guard, just because I had enough money left over to bring a unit of them instead of a unit of the lower tier stuff. And also they are spears, so they could be useful for mass purposes or for trying to defend against any sally outs of cavalry. Witch Realm Hammer Guard are of course going to be useful in this matchup, because the armor piercing that they bring to bear. A very, very impressive unit with their rusted warhammers. Got 2 units of the Snaga Stalkers, because they only cost 50 apiece. They're very, very numerous. And of course numbers is one way that the attackers can try and impose themselves. In a 4v4 like this, we are going to have to be a little bit more reliant on quality and damage dealing potential, but where you can pad your numbers out a little bit like this, especially when it comes along with bringing some slightly stronger units elsewhere in your army, that's a choice that can be made and can pay off for you. A couple of units of Witch Realm Pikemen. I can imagine that they're going to be one of the main things that the defenders are going to try and focus down with crossbows and troll slayers and the like, because taking away the anchor of the front line like this from Angmar, while they are still very, very durable, it just takes away that long range weapon that they have in melee. We also have a couple of units of Orc Fellas. Armor piercing, they can hide anywhere, which is nice, but they're obviously very fragile in comparison to a lot of the units they're going to be going after. So for the most part they're here for numbers and that little bit of armor piercing bite, but committing them at the right time is important, because otherwise they could be largely wasted. Got a unit of Blackwatch Legion for that mass pushing potential. One of the units of Angmar, which of course is very, very popular for that reason. Everyone's one of people's favourite mechanics there. Another unit of Snaga Stalkers over there. 2 units of Barrow-wights, which are going to be important, because I knew I was going to take a bit of a beating in this fight with regards to all the projectiles coming at me, but it's really difficult to get rid of the Barrow-wights quickly outside of maybe trying to utilise artillery, which is something else we do have to contend with. Barrow-wights are also quite amazingly slow, of course, so that's something else that we're going to have to be on the lookout for. Witchers, another one of the units Angmar has, which everyone loves to hate. Witchers, the key really is when you commit them forward. They can be devastating, but if they're seen too early, they're going to get shot up, and Cardolan and Arthedain are 2 factions which both have ample skirmishers to deal with Witchers quickly, be they crossbows, javelins, armor-piercing archers, rangers, you name it, they've got it. Witchers could be very devastating for us, or they could be an utter waste, but given the funds that I had, it was worth the gamble. And then we have 3 units of the upgraded Guardians of Cardolan. Again, that solid front line, certainly significantly more heavily armoured and more defensively orientated than our Rhudaur allies, so I felt it made a good amount of sense to bring a lot of these guys to act as our main bulwark and front line, at least initially. Unit of Witch Realm Blackguard, which is where my general is, a little bit safer than the Witch Realm Hammer Guard, and I wanted to use the Hammer Guard a little bit more freely when I was able to, because of their higher attacking capabilities. And I've got 1 unit of Trolls of Angmar over here, so when they can be committed into stuff like pike blocks to break them up quickly. Very damaging, of course, but again, Trolls, the key is in the timing. Moving on to my ally, Medexa, we're going to be fighting more as a pair than anything else in this battle, going through the middle of the map. He's got some Witch Realm Enslavers for that extra armor-piercing bite. He's got a catapult as well, which is going to be useful here in the middle of the map if we can use it in the correct manner, because of the more direct, it's more of a classic siege over here, whereas our 2 allies have got quite a way to march around the outside of the settlement, and then it's more of a sort of hilly based terrain in the back of the map, as we'll see in just a moment. We're going to have to go through the settlement a little bit more directly, and artillery of course can be good at clearing out those kind of choke points. Rhudaur Clansman, once again, he's got some Coldfell Maidens, so similar sort of thought process here with the Coldfell Maidens, I would assume, as I had with the Warg Skirmishers, in that they're going to be useful no matter what because of their javelins, and if you do need a little bit of extra mobility, they're certainly not defenseless against other cavalry in melee either, so makes for a pretty good bet here on this fight, I would suggest. Rhudaur Clansmen, plenty of Rhudaur Swordsmen, so some good numbers here. Not going to have to do all of the infantry heavy lifting in terms of just trying to grind the enemy down all on my own. They're not as tanky, of course, as the Guardians of Cardolan, but they are numerous, and we will need that moving forwards in this fight. 3 units of Ettenmore's Troll Hunters as well. Another unit of Arthedain Berserkers. Dunman Pikemen are hidden, so they're a cheaper pike than the Arthedain, but it still is good that we have another one of those Phalanx units, and of course Rhudaur Trollshaw Axe Throwers, other such units that can hide as well. And now for the final attacking army, we have another Angmar force, played by the Wound Raider. He has got some Goblin Band on the front, so some hidden spears, which can be utilised nicely. Some Snaga Stalkers also hidden. He too has gone for some upgraded Guardians of Cardolan, I would assume for the same reason I have, because when things get a little bit grindy, a little bit atrocious in these siege battle fights, this is the kind of unit that you want really being your mainstay on the front line, because they're not, compared to other line infantry units, the best when it comes to dealing damage, but they will stay alive for a good amount of time, even under skirmish fire, as long as it's not really high tier stuff like high-end crossbows and armor-piercing missiles from archers. So yeah, bit of a no-brainer really, and the armor upgrade obviously only heightens that aspect of them. He's gone for another unit of Gundabad Guard in comparison to me. He's also upgraded the armor on his Witchround Pikemen. They're still pretty well armoured anyway, but this brings them very much into the mould of what the Uruk-hai Pikemen are, so they may not have the same shield value as the Arthedain Pikes do, but this armour upgrade is kind of their answer to that as well, to make them tankier against all sources of damage. Scourge Raiders are here, Wargfellers are here. He too has gone for some Warg Skirmishers and Warg Riders, and actually some Witchram Inquisitors. I believe he felt as though this was going to be more of an open map, and so he gambled on having a bit more in terms of cavalry. Now, initially it may look as though that hasn't actually paid off, but he is perhaps in one of the more open areas of the map, so he can still use this to his advantage. And ultimately they are still high-end units, of course, so they can still be used in the right way. Trolls of Gundabad and Trolls of Angmar here as well, so he's gone for both units of Trolls in comparison to me. He's gone for maybe a little bit more of a damage-dealing army with cavalry, Trolls, less in terms of the classic tanky units of Angmar, stuff like the Barrow Wights. But then again, that will suit him because he again has to really go it alone here, whereas I'm acting much more as the defensive aspect of a 2-man assault going through the middle. Now then, for the defenders, we have one of the 3 Cardolan armies. Chong Ki Lam here has got some Royal Court of House Rhudaur. They'd be brave if they made an initial charge into that full Angmar army all on their own. But it does show that the defenders have also decided to bring a bit of cavalry here and there, perhaps some sally outs, perhaps to be saved for later on. Time will only tell. The rest of his army is back here, and they are going to have to try and withstand this Angmar assault, which is coming around the long way. Tharbad Warhammers, 2 units of Dunedain Captains, so bear in mind as well that Cardolan, each army is going to have less funds to work with than the attackers here, because it's a 4v4. He's gone for some very high-end units here, so going for quality here and hoping that maybe in these choke points he can pen Angmar and Rhudaur forces up and then just chop them to pieces with his high-end infantry and then support it with crossbows. Not a bad bet, but of course it does mean that you have less margin for error when you've got less numbers. Tharbad Warhammers, as I said, Dunedain Captain is going to be good against the lower end stuff. The Wardens of Tir Gorthad make for a really good centre to the Cardolan line, especially because a lot of the basic Cardolan units have a propensity to rout. Midhiriath Sharpshooters and Manatar Romen Gatekeepers, all of these Cardolan crossbows going to be one of the mainstays of their defence here, because even with as tanky as Angmar can be, crossbows are of course one way that you can pretty much nullify that very effectively. Less so with the archers, of course. Archers are going to be more the sort of thing which is going to be really useful against the Rhudaur forces among the attackers. But a couple of units of Midhiriath archers, a couple of units of Midhiriath spears, and a unit of Midhiriath Manatons just for some rank and file forces on the front line. So you can see the initial choke point over here, and then it leads further back into the docks at the back of the settlement, and of course into the higher reaches over on the other side of the map. But in many ways the Wound Raider has got the furthest to travel unless he decides to try and take the direct route here into the middle of the settlement, which is where D.F. Morris can be found, commanding the one and only Arthedain army on the field today. Some fully upgraded Arthedain man-at-arms are good as a line infantry unit. They'll outperform the basic Rhudaur stuff, but they will be outperformed by the Angmar forces among our ranks. Some Wardens of the North armor-piercing missiles are of course a terrifying force as long as they are used wisely on the right targets. Arthedain men-at-arms, some Evendim spearmen to shore up the front line. Knights of Illuminus are very, very scary, of course. Unlike the Royal Court of House Rhudaur, they can comfortably beat every cavalry unit we have one-on-one, with the exception of the Witchround Inquisitors. So they're not going to have free reign over the entire battlefield, but it's something we definitely need to give its due respect, because they're a terrifying force if they can get into those soft, squishy targets we don't want to be charged. Evendim spearmen on the front line as well. Dunedain Peacekeepers and Arthedain Pikemen. Not too surprising to see Pikes here. The Peacekeepers will also be really good against the lighter units that all of us have, to be fair. But we also have plenty of heavy units that will be a bit better at mitigating the damage of those axes, and numerous gate guards as well. So plenty of really good pikes for all of the factions really on display today. Arthedain marksmen, a couple of units of them up here. The trebuchet is in a really nasty position for us moving through the middle because it's got a perfect angle of attack through the one corridor that we really have to work with from the front. I believe there are some units hidden up here on the walls as well, stuff like bandits and the like. Then moving over here we get into WK's army. He's got some Minhiriath men-at-arms, again high tier units in the Dunedain captains and the Tharbad warhammers. Once again crossbows. I imagine Cardolan are going to follow very much the same kind of blueprints all around. The difference is WK has actually got some mercenary guildsmen. They've got terrible morale, really, in comparison to a lot of other units, but that armour piercing is going to be handy when it comes to trying to deal with stuff like my Guardians of Khaldun Doom. Really anything from the Angmar armies. It's going to be a little bit better dealt with by Merc Guildsmen perhaps than other basic Cardolan units. He's also got Raw Court of House the Rhudaur. Again, he could try and charge directly into my army perhaps, but my warg skirmishers are there, and ultimately cost effectiveness is going to be called into question if he just tries to do that. Of course, the attackers can often get away with taking losses where we can't, but spoilers, he doesn't just kamikaze charge into my army. But more on that later. He's got some Minhiriath spearmen up here in what is really intends to be the final stand. The sort of in terms of elevation, the highest point on the map often is, and this is where they're going to be pitching their tents this time at the end. Greenway Garrison footmen are here, so some basic Cardolan pikes, which basic pikes are fine. If it comes down to the late game and it turns into an arms race between pikes, just having anything that you can use to fight that war is going to be useful for you. And finally, Eclipse himself is going to be also playing as Cardolan. Set up some Minhiriath archers here with the stakes, just to make sure we can't unthinkingly charge through the wilderness over here. Certainly a little bit more of a, again, like I said, hilly terrain back over here that he's going to have to try and defend. He does have a trebuchet with which to do that though, much like the frontal defence has. Plenty of Greenway units to pad out the numbers, so a different approach here compared to his ally over on the other side, going for full quality. This is going for much more quantity. All of these Greenway units will be useful for holding the line, of course, and it'll take much longer for us to chop our way through them, but they're also going to do less damage in return. They're going to be maybe relying a little bit more on attrition with all of these pikes, at least in melee, and then hoping their ranged units can really do that quick damage that they need. Minhiriath men-at-arms, there are some Tharbad warhammers in here, so he's not bereft of quality by any means, but he has gone for a bigger army rather than a smaller, more elite army, comparatively speaking. Men-at-arm Roman gatekeepers and Minhiriath sharpshooters as well, of course. Now, I will make a little bit of a cut because there is a little bit of manoeuvring early on and the battle doesn't get underway right from the get-go, but there isn't too much of a grace period. Well, there's not really a grace period here. 30 seconds was what was quoted in-game, which of course is completely meaningless because when 30 seconds pass, especially with a little bit of lag, nothing has really happened. So, I'll rejoin in short order when the battle is about to get underway. So we shall rejoin here as the Coldfell Maidens from Medexa's army start to poke their nose inside the settlement, and immediately are going to get it bloodied by these units, by this unit I should say, of Wardens of the North, which of course is going to do a lot of damage to a unit like this very quickly. You could argue you don't necessarily need a unit as strong as the Wardens of the North to be doing the kind of damage that they're doing here, and you could just make do with regular archers against the Coldfell Maidens. Shielded or no, they're still at best only sporting medium armour. But we're going to get some javelin volleys into these Minhiriath men-at-arms as well. Hopefully these frame drops do not persist, but like I said, I've had to fight my PC in order to get it to turn on today, which is obviously a bit of a worrying sign. Coldfell Maidens going to pop themselves back behind this building over here. There's also the slight worry of the Knights of Numinous being close by, of course. In a straight up melee fight, the Coldfell Maidens do have an anti-cavalry bonus, but it's going to be nowhere near enough to equalise a fight against the Knights of Numinous. See down here, on the low ground as well, both my units of Orc skirmishers are going to be marching alongside Mevon's force, prevent any sort of cavalry sallying forth from Eclipse's army, and also just to give a few more javelins potentially for later on to try and get through that hilly area at the back. We can also see over here that indeed the Wound Raider is also going to utilise his Warg skirmishers in much the same way, in that he's not going to be sending them with his own army, and he's going to be sending them to support another force, albeit this time is a little bit parallel to what we're doing, because he's going to be moving in and trying to get some side volleys into these Arthedain forces. Not going to be able to charge right into the settlement because of the presence of spears. And wargs, of course, are also fairly vulnerable to these kinds of projectiles. We'll be trying to go after the Wardens of the North, attacking artillery coming in as well, destroying the watchtower at the front gate. So the Wardens of the North are going to have to get out of here because any Warden that is lost is a real problem for the defenders. Obviously, like I said, individual army quality is going to be in favour of us as the attackers this time around. So the units of quality that they do have, they need to preserve the lives of fairly diligently, and they're not going to be able to do that if the Warg skirmishers continue to do their thing. Well, the Coldfell Maidens are back, no longer under the pressure of those armour-piercing projectiles. They're going to try and get some point-blank volleys off with their javelins. So far, it's really just playing tag with the cavalry as our main armies move to try and catch up. You can see that my army's still getting into position to get in behind Madex's force and moving up with my army to... The intention was for me here to lead the way because, of course, Angmar is significantly more solid than Rhudaur's army overall, and we don't want to be losing too much of Rhudaur's damage-dealing potential as we make our way through the first layers of the defence. Meanwhile, we also have the Warg Riders over here, I believe, as well. So far, just a couple of Warg Skirmishers, the Warg Riders just biding their time as well. So with this much cavalry, especially with the defenders now back into defensive shape, the Moon Raider's going to have to get fairly creative with how he utilises his cav. Plenty of anti-cavalry on display from all of the defending forces, most notably in the amount of pikes that they can bring to bear. Albeit in these initial defences it's just the Evandin spears, but that's still enough to ward off very basic units of cavalry. The Wargs are a little bit more useful than normal cavalry from other factions because of that extra hit point that they do have. Dunedain Peacekeepers taking some javelin fire from between the houses there. Once again, the Coldfell Maidens making a nuisance of themselves. Dunedain Peacekeepers, an impressive enough unit, so again they want to be preserving the lives of as much of their Dunedain class units as they are able to. My army gets closer as well, we will be starting to see my forces make their way into the settlement. Some Midhiriath archers getting into position as well from Chonki-Lan. And even though Wargs do have that second hit point, archers are still the best way to really deal with them effectively and efficiently. As soon as that hit point is gone, they will fall away very, very quickly, and they represent a fairly decent portion of the Moon Raiders' army here, so that is worth bearing in mind as well. Over on this side, still a fairly long advance, at least on the other side. The Moon Raider is able to support our central advance more directly, whereas over here, because of the sheer cliffs that Mavan's army and my Wargs are dealing with, we're going to have to wait until we get into firing range of Eclipse's army back over here. Not necessarily all a good thing, of course. My Wargs won't particularly enjoy being in melee range there. Some Snaga Stalkers from myself moving forward in loose formation. They're very, very unlikely to be the target of any sort of arrow fire, and if they are, that can only be a good thing for us. 2 units of them, 50 gold apiece, is a very reasonable amount of money for a unit that has 250 men in it. Rhudaur clansmen also moving forward, obviously a much more impressive unit in all aspects than the Snaga Stalkers, but just laying the groundwork for our attack now. You can see that I've got my Guardians of Cardolan, Scourge Raiders, got some pikemen as well, so not going to be moving forward with just Snaga Stalkers because that's going to do absolutely nothing to any Arthedain front line. Even if it's just Evandin Spearmen, they'll be able to hold against an assault from them fairly easily. So that is going to be the plan as soon as the engagement starts to happen. Reinforcements of more genuine quality can start to be filtered in. Rhudaur with their clansmen can certainly help with that as well. Barrow-wights, of course, take a long time to cover any sort of ground in a battle of any description. Still need to be a little bit careful of these Cardolan units as well. There are plenty of routes through the settlements as well, so Chon over here is going to be able to hold on to this position even if the front looks like it's going to start to collapse, because he's got plenty of ways that he can move back through the settlement, so it's not as if he's in any danger of getting cut off when the Womb Raiders' army does eventually arrive. And of course he's got plenty of opportunity to use these defensive walls as well to get some side-swiping shots with his archers. So plenty to be thankful for from the defending position here with what they have. We've got the Coldfell Maidens moving in once again. This time I've got my Snaga Stalkers up in front so that they can try and move to engage the Coldfell Maidens in melee with anything. So I'm not intending to advance and attack with the Snaga Stalkers because they're not going to do anything against a spear line like this anyway. They're just intended to be a screen, so for the moment at least they are a defensive unit. But against stuff like Midhiriath Men-at-Arms especially, we're going to start to struggle. The other unit of Coalfell Maids moving forward, but you can see here that the defenders see their opportunity and that the Snaga Stalkers are a weak infantry unit, so they're going to try and engage with them. And they will of course be very effective at dealing with them. A combination of basic spears and axes will be enough against orc trash. And this is going to be the green light as well for me to start moving forward some heavier units in, like the Guardians of Cardolan. I've got my other unit of Snaga Stalkers in here as well, should the need arise. And if we start to fall apart very, very quickly, Rhudaur can commit his unit of Rhudaur Clansmen to be that defensive bulwark that we need. But for the moment, all these Snaga Stalkers need to be is a screen, so that we can use that javelin damage to good effect. And even though we're using them on fairly basic units, this sort of damage is the kind of thing which defenders can rarely tolerate for too long. So that's what we're going to be doing here. All a matter of efficiency. And of course, if we send too much forward, we're going to draw the ire of several units of crossbows, artillery, defending javelins as well. And yeah, that trebuchet is in a very menacing position, but they're not going to want to use it on singular units of Snaga and Rhudaur clans. And maybe they will be more tempted now that I'm sending forward my Guardians of Cardolan to help hold things down. As far as a line infantry unit goes, they're going to be better than really anything the defenders have to offer. Certainly from a defensive point of view, they're going to be able to withstand a lot of damage. It's going to take some of their better units, like their Arthedain and their range units, to really deal with them efficiently, but especially with that armour upgrade, we're going to be having a pretty good time for ourselves. Meanwhile, over here you can see Eclipse's force, mercenary crossbowmen are here, trying to go after the artillery pieces from Mevon's army, and also defending artillery itself. Trebuchet way up on the hill over there. But Mevon's army is fairly spread out, so the amount of damage per hit you're going to be able to do with the Trebuchet is somewhat limited in this kind of position. So I've got my walk skirmishers that are going to move forward to try and act as a bit of a screen as well for the Merc crossbows. Merc crossbows do have a little bit better range, but they're very micro-intensive and very fragile. Still, they succeeded in at least delaying this assault because of forcing the artillery crews to dismount. Now they're going to continue to do their thing. Meanwhile, it is still over here in the middle where you can see, yeah, trebuchet volleys are now starting to come in, which is obviously bad news for us. Hitting centre mass into a force of Rhudaur spears and some of their cavalry as well, with more Rhudaur clansmen arriving. My second unit of Snaga Stalkers is also going to be committed to the front line just to keep this assault going in the right direction. A unit of Rhudaur Axemen as well, just to add a little bit of actual damage to this front line, because most of our units are either fodder, designed to be meat shields, or very defensive units like my Guardians of Cardolan, so a bit of armour piercing won't go amiss. Pikes are on the front line as well, so already this fight is taking shape into a real war of attrition, which should favour us as long as we commit our units in the correct manner. This is exactly the sort of thing that Angmar can do very well, and the fly in the ointment really is the amount of damage that crossbowmen from Cardolan can do, and of course trebuchets are very, very punishing if they can get really good hits. Arthedain marksmen in the background, been here out men-at-arms biding their time, which Roman slavers also moving forward fairly quickly, and my BAR-I-Whites also making their way to the front line, which will basically ensure that outside of artillery, this front line will continue to fight for a long, long time. That's what the BAR-I-Whites offer you. This is of course a luxury that the Womb Raider will not have, because he did not bring BAR-I-Whites, but considering the amount of terrain that he had to cross, that's probably a blessing in disguise, given that it would have taken his BAR-I-Whites an awfully long time to make it their way over to this Cardolan defensive position. 2 units of trolls as well. First initial volleys from the Cardolan archers as well, making their way into the defensive position. Just some basic Guatlo trackers, but nonetheless, as long as they fire at the right targets, the lighter elements of the Angmar army, you can start to make the Angmar host look a little bit less intimidating. Meanwhile, over here, the slog continues. Guardians of Cardolan have taken damage, of course, from the trebuchet and from the defensive units that they have on display. With the pikes in position, it's going to be a little bit more difficult for our units to actually establish themselves in melee and start doing a bit more damage. Even stuff like the Witch Elm Slavers, but I see this as an opportunity to commit my trolls early actually, and that's because there's not an awful lot of units here on this front line that are actually going to be able to deal damage to the trolls all that effectively in melee. And ranged units can go after them if they want. Arthedain Troll Slayers, of course, just popping into existence there, are going to throw their javelins into the front line as well, which is a problem, but to be honest, I felt like this was actually worthwhile, and actually the Arthedain Troll Slayers are going to go after the Witch Elm Slavers instead, so my trolls are going to be able to lay down a good amount of damage here. This won't be enough for us to actually win this front line, and I was aware of that, because if the front line looked like it was starting to fall, there's plenty of reinforcements that the defenders can still commit. But from a cost efficiency standpoint, from the amount of kills my Trolls of Angmar are going to pick up, I felt like this was a worthwhile commitment. You can see here that the number of Arthedain pikemen is already starting to tumble very quickly, as will the number of units like the Minhiriath men-at-arms here as well, because as much as they're a line infantry unit, they can fight in close quarters a little bit better. They're not going to have the damage to deal with the Trolls as quickly as they would like, and those Trolls with those shards of metal grafted onto their arms are going to be able to cleave their way through a lot of these men of the West. Dunedain Peacekeepers will do a little bit better, but once again they're going to prove to be the target of some missiles. Barrow-wights taking a hit there from the trebuchet, which is unsurprising given as though this is the best tool to use against Barrow-wights, but as long as at least 150 of them stay alive in this situation, I'm not too concerned. Trollshore axe throwers and Assenwalls, Troll Hunters moving in as well, so this is pretty much exactly what you want to be seeing from a Rhudaur and Angmar combined assault. Angmar taking most of the damage up front and absorbing a lot of the punishment, doing the melee heavy lifting with a bit of Rhudaur support from their throwing projectiles. Meanwhile, we've got the Witcher-Arm Inquisitors waiting here. The melee engagement hasn't yet begun over here, but you can see that Cardolan are preparing for it, getting their forces into defensive position, into this sort of V-shape infantry defence, and then going to try and get their skirmishers into a good position to respond to any Angmarim advance. Still plenty of archers biding their time as well. Over here on the shore, Rhudaur are still waiting as well, trying to get into position so they don't just charge unthinkingly into this area. Of course, over on this side of the field as well, you're more likely to run into the issue of hidden units, because there is actually trees and cover to take into account as well. So when you consider Eclipse's defensive position, you have to take it with a pinch of salt, because there is probably more than we are seeing in there. And indeed there is. Meanwhile, you can see Trolls already falling by the wayside, but lots of damage done to the forces that were initially there. They have been replaced very quickly by other units, but of course in a war of attrition where you're constantly losing manpower, that's something that we are going to fancy our chances in a little bit more so than the defenders. Trollshore axe throwers going after the Dunedain captain, so again that's a good choice of target. We're still taking a lot of damage from that trebuchet, which is a problem because at this point the fight is turning fairly heavily in favour of the defensive line. The trebuchet continuing to just do tons and tons of damage, so I'm going to have to send in a unit of Orc fellas just to make sure we have enough manpower on the front line to keep this attack going and the Barrow-wights don't get swallowed whole. But yeah, we're just hoping that the trebuchet runs out of ammo fairly quickly, to be fair. There's not really much else we can do given the lay of the land, as it were. Orc fellas are not going to last too long in melee, be it under arrow fire or just in straight up melee combat, but we need them numbers on the front line at this point. And their armour piercing will do a bit of damage, but unfortunately for me, the part of the front line that was flagging was an area with Dunedain captains, which is not the best of foes for the Orc fellas to be trying to tangle with. Meanwhile, over here, you can see Orc skirmishers getting up close and personal with the Cardolan infantry. And what are they going after? Going after the Royal Court House of the Rhudaur, which is interesting. The Wound Raider not enjoying the prospect perhaps of cavalry later on, even though you could be going after something like the Wardens of Tyr and Gorthad, maybe. With the infantry that's in and amongst them, maybe try and do some damage to the infantry, but either way, you're going to be using your javelins on a good target. Guathlo trackers, presumably who are out of ammunition, although it doesn't look like it. They've still got their bows out, which makes it all the more confusing as to why they would get into such close proximity with Warg skirmishers such as this. Elsewhere, other units biding their time. The Witches of Angmar over there, of course, from the Wound Raider as well, worth bearing in mind. And our clans were moving forward. So far, neither side has been too interested in using a bunch of their resources over here. The defenders just waiting for the ideal moment to try and use some of their skirmishers to do some damage to Rhudaur on the advance, because Rhudaur don't really have the advantage of having a bunch of Angmar infantry to accept that punishment for them over here. So it has to be maybe a little bit more careful and considered in his approach. Meanwhile, over here, you can see that Morris has escaped the settlement with his Knights of Anunas from the side gate and has caught Medexa's rear forces unaware, the stuff that he was saving for later on. Going into the Brandwein Berserkers, maybe not the best of charges, honestly. I have noticed this, and I'm going to send back my Gundabad Guard to act as a bit of a deterrent as far as spears go. But Fraudulent Javelins and Arthedain Berserkers can potentially use their ammunition in melee. Again, maybe not the best of charges into the Fraudulent Javelins, but it's still a real problem this. We don't want to be losing Arthedain Berserkers and Fraudulent Javelins at this juncture in the battlefield, because we need, in the battle, just generally. Because we're going to be needing them later. Knights of the Numenus charging back once again. Gundabad Guard going to try and chase them down, throwing axes. Being utilised, the pikes should also be being utilised as well, but this is a bit of a concern for us. On the front line, Blackwatch Legion hovering, loitering with intent. Ettenwald's Troll Hunters pushing through, so the front line starting to flag a little bit with more reinforcements being added to the mix. My second unit of Orc Fellas came in, another unit of Guardians of Cardolan. Continuing to take a lot of punishment though from varying sources. And now it's from bandits from Cardolan getting some nice rear shots into our front line. We just have to hope that this is going to be enough for us to do the business. I'm going to commit forward my Blackwatch Legion as well to try and really hammer home this gap that has steadily appeared in this defensive line. Again, maybe this is a little bit soon to be using Blackwatch Legion, but I saw a bit of an opportunity here to really put the defenders under a lot of pressure and then to force them essentially to either commit a bunch of units over here or to surrender a lot of defensive territory to us pretty quickly. Trebuchet unfortunately still has ammunition, which is going to do damage to the Witcher on Pikemen I was committing forward to try and solidify our gains. So this is risky. We could end up paying for this with more than we actually have, but I figured it was worth the risk. Rhudaur captains moving in to try and help deal with the Blackwatch Legion. There are other units as well, Tharvad, Warhammers, and it's loitering with intent. Got some Scourge Raiders moving forward to try and help out with the Rhudaur skirmishers as well, just to put the defensive line under just that much more pressure with their throwing axes. Meanwhile, over here, much more genuine Angmar assault now. Once again, Guardians of Cardolan, got a Goblin Band moving in. I don't really know what these Guatho trackers were thinking when they decided to try and move over here, but they've been easily squashed by the Angmarin that were waiting. Gundabad Guard and Scourge Raiders waiting as well. Scourge Raiders, of course, more throwing projectiles to be used. But this is where we're starting to see... Ooh, Nero the end. The Witchers moving in, carving through that front line. Minhiriath Men-at-Arms and Wards of Tyr Gorthad taking an awful lot of damage there. Are the Witchers going to be able to use another volley? No, they are going to get engaged in melee by the Minhiriath Men-at-Arms, but I doubt this unit of line infantry is going to be able... So yeah, I doubt it's going to be able to keep its mental fortitude in check in a fight like this. Meanwhile, Rhudaur Swordsman taking some damage from on high. Minhiriath Sharpshooters are silent for the time being, but the Greenway Garrison units will feel okay at having to deal with just a singular unit of Rhudaur Swordsmen for the time being. Over in the background, some Rhudaur Clansmen waiting menacingly. But still fairly low-key engagement considering what's happening in other parts of the field at this stage. Speaking of which, over yonder, Lumbermen still doing their thing. Tharvad Warhammers coming in from behind and actually cutting off my Blackwatch Legion, so in the end, I have to say the Blackwatch Legion didn't really work out in my favour, mainly because I wasn't able to get these Witch-Arm Hammer Guard in to support them quickly enough before the door was slammed shut in my face, so unfortunately a bit of a failure there from myself, but we can go again. And ultimately we're still putting the defensive line under pressure, so it's not the end of the world, but it's the sort of thing which the defenders will take great heart from, the fact they were able to stop the mass push. And an example of the Blackwatch Legion there not being as effective as they could otherwise be. The basic Dunman pikes are moving forward. But yeah, so far, defensive line still holding up pretty well. More reinforcements could move forward. My Scourge Raiders taking a real beating from projectiles, of course, but they're having to front load their defence here in many ways, the defenders that are trying to stop us from moving forward. All of their artillery and ammunition, a lot of it at the very least, is being utilised to try and stop us, which is fine, but it means they're not going to be able to use it later on, and of course Mevon's army is still very healthy. And there you can see another volley from the Witchers, which we just very, very recently missed. A lot of crispy humans on the floor there now. Gundabad Guard having to try and deal with Tharvad Warhammers and Dunedain Captains, so trying to be a little bit aggressive here, Cardolan, but they're being made to pay for it. The fragmented nature of their front line means the Wind Raider is really being able to exploit this defensive position. Fellas now moving forward, and yeah, there's holes that can be can be exploited. The Guathlo trackers are going to plug that gap, but Guathlo trackers are only going to be able to accomplish so much in melee. Of course, the Tharbad Warhammers and Dunedain Captains both will be very good against the Gundabad Guard, but it's more the fact that there are other units in close proximity. The Trolls won't want any part of this. This is all of the stronger Cardolan infantry, which they won't want to have to try and deal with. Guardians of Khan Doom are going to flood forward though, and that's going to be something else which difficult to get rid of. Another unit of Gundabad Guard back there as well. And reinforcements also. The only thing that's really missing is Barrow Wights. Meanwhile, still the Greenway units holding on. Rhudaur units biding their time and waiting, taking the longer approach at the moment, Maven, just holding on, waiting to be as effective as he possibly can. Meanwhile, over here, by far the bloodiest encounter on the battlefield so far has been the one that myself and Medex have been contesting with Morris and WK. Again, we're seeing more of these projectiles used. You can actually see I used, by accident more than anything else, one projectile of my Witches there. They managed to graze the unit of footmen, but not exactly what you want to be seeing from your Witches. Wards of the North, firing into the front line, maybe more out of desperation than anything else, because at this point you can see there are plenty of the elements of this defensive line that are routing, so they're going to need yet more reinforcements, which is maybe the sort of thing which they're not too eager to provide. I mean, Dunedain Trollslayers are on the front line. They're trying to charge into the exposed areas with their Royal Court of House Rhudaur, going after those Ettenmore's Troll Hunters there, who are trying to shoot down the line with their javelins, which is a worthy tactic. Rodrim Javelins moving forward. I've got my Witch Realm Scourge Raiders, still very depleted, but still trying to throw what axes they have left. And yeah, this is obviously going to be, it's looking pretty grim at this point for the defenders. Looks like our pressure is finally paying off. My other unit, Barrow Wights, is also on the front line. So you know that our attack isn't going anywhere, and you may feel as though you're not going to be able to get accomplished what you want to. Hammerguard are also in behind enemy lines now at this point, and going to try and stop the Arthedain Men-at-Arms from reinforcing this front line. The Royal Court of House Rhudaur are here as well. A little bit depleted my Hammerguard after being intercepted by a lot of pretty decent units, but they can make a real nuisance of themselves here, and their presence here is going to essentially ensure that we're going to be victorious once and for all in this part of the battlefield, which is now blanketed with this stench cloud from the rotting meat projectiles of the Trebuchet. But of course, that is a welcome sight for us, not only because we're orcs, but because it means the enemy are almost certainly out of ammunition. In here we have Men-at-Arms. There's routing units in behind here somewhere, but anyway, more of a concerted effort now. I'd say that, still just Rhudaur swordsmen doing their thing. And it's the Greenway pikes which are going to be the issue here for Rhudaur. Rhudaur clansmen still waiting. There is a route we can take up this way as well, so it's not just a singular choke point that Maven is having to deal with here. Moving forward with some Trollshore Axos as well, exactly what the Doctor ordered against Greenway units such as this. Meanwhile, you can see Arthedain Men-at-Arms are breaking. The Wound Raider has very, very quickly managed to break through this section over here. Dunedain Rangers getting ripped apart by Trolls, so moving forward aggressively with the Trolls, with the Cavalry. The mass was simply too much, and Chong has decided to retreat with several of his units. And yeah, that's probably the wise move, because staying there to die is not going to help your team at all. So you're going to lose a few units. The Rangers in particular are a real tragedy, but there's nothing that can be done about that. Meanwhile, Chong is also retreating through the area of the field actually that we are in, and as a result, my Gundabad Guard are going to be able to stop Manatar Roman Gatekeepers and a unit of Minhiriath Sharpshooters from retreating. This is a big catch actually, 2 units of crossbows that still have ammunition, and the Gatekeepers as well as a melee force are an impressive one. So the fact that we're able to stop them from retreating here is going to be a real boon for us, something that we can afford to be very pleased with ourselves about. They may return from routing, but as they're routing that direction and the Wound Raider is going to be waiting for them, I would not be so sure. But that's good for us. I mean, we've taken a lot of losses over here, but so have the defenders. Whether this is going to prove to be worthwhile in the late game or not remains to be seen. It was a painful encounter for both myself and Medexa, but that's exactly the sort of fight that I was kind of ready for based on my composition. And Medexa, of course, as well, has got his supporting units. It's hard to prepare Rhudaur for that kind of fight, much harder anyway than it is for Angmar too. But even so, I think we did a pretty decent job there, and obviously, you know, we've been far quicker in our aggression than our allies have been. But my thinking was that there's really not a great deal of point in waiting, seeing as the defensive line is right there, and if the defenders want to try and focus us down, that'll just open the door wider for Maven and the Wound Raider to do their thing. So that's why I was eager to get things underway pretty quickly from our perspective, and we've got enough of an army to still help our allies in the late game as well. But the Womb Raider, and especially Mevin, with how much he's been able to conserve his forces so far, are going to have to be the ones to be the match winners in the late game. Trollshort Axe Throwers doing damage here to the Merc crossbows as they put themselves into position. Trying to fire into the Rhudaur lines. Arthedain Berserkers are there, a worthy target to go after, but the Merc crossbows are not going to be able to withstand too many throwing axe volleys, it must be said. Wow. And yeah, that was actually, that Menethai Romain Gatekeepers unit was where the Cardolan General was, so that's going to lower the morale of Chonky Lamb's army. Something which we can also potentially exploit given Cardolan's morale issues that are well documented. Going to Rhudaur, but the noose starts to tighten. And we are in the ascendancy at this point, with two defensive positions falling in close proximity of one another, and the close timing of one another as well. Catching a few units unawares, again, these transitional phases, as I often say, are where the attackers can really make the most, make hay while the sun shines, as it were, and that's what we've been able to do here, so that's been good for us. And now really the only thing that remains is to try and get Mevin into the same position as us so we can start attacking the highest point of the settlement, the Witchram Inquisitors starting to make a use of themselves in Eclipse's rear lines here. You can see Rhudaur Swordsman, Trollshort Axe Throwers moving forward. My Wargs are now going to move forward, but expecting to see units, yeah, bandits have revealed themselves, and here you have archers wasting an awful lot of their ammunition, though, so Warg skirmishers. Following the reveal of the bandits, my own Wargs are also just going to utilise their javelins here, try and do as much damage to Eclipse's units here as possible, get Mevin moving as quickly as possible. Taking a bit of damage from the defending archers, but again, not too concerned about that, because actually it's better for my Wargs to take this damage. The only thing they're useful for is their javelins at this point anyway, really. Better for my Wargs to take that damage than it is for Mevin's infantry to be taking that damage. But my Wargs don't want to be killed off cheaply in melee by Greenway Garrison Spearmen, so I will be leaving this area pretty promptly and allowing Mevin to once again take the lead in this regard. It's a fairly uninviting area to try and attack from Mevin, to be fair, which is probably why he's been pretty cautious in his advance, especially in comparison to the other attacks on the field. I mean, here we have sharpshooters as well, going to be able to do plenty of damage. Cardolan, of course, crossbows really the main selling point of their faction as a whole. Mercenary crossmen may be out of ammunition. It's rare that you'll see them used as a cudgel to charge into the enemy. But I suppose the Trollshort Axe Throwers are not the sturdiest unit in the world. They're still going to move forward, and the problem that Eclipse has really is the fact that the cavalry of the Womb Raider is going to be at its most useful over here. Witchram Inquisitors, Warg Riders moving over doing damage to the Minhiriath Archers. So he's going to have to retreat, basically. He's going to have to move, and this again is one of those transitional phases. A situation in which Mevin can pick off some stragglers, stretch our lead a little bit as the attackers, and go about things in that manner. Meanwhile, you can see over here that WK is moving forward with a single unit of Minhiriath Sharpshooters, which is a bold call given that we are moving forward. Not wasting too much time myself and the deck, so obviously our primary route up to the highest area of the settlement is this one, which again is not great for us. It's pretty narrow, very steep. Probably the best and most inviting route for us to take would be this one, at least in terms of the room that we have to work with. So that's going to be what the Womb Raider is going to be attempting to do, even though there's maybe a little bit more of an opportunity to use a greater number of skirmishers. Meanwhile, Warg Riders, Trolls of Angmar as well from the Womb Raider, making their presence felt, and yeah, Mevin forcing Eclipse back up to the final stand. Further back, the rest of the Rhudaur army is now going to be able to make its way forward. Been quite cautious up to this point because of the defensive position of all of the skirmishers, which will be able to hit Mevin on the assault, but at this point it doesn't really matter. You're going to have to move in and attack them at some point. You're just going to have to accept the fact that you're going to take a fair amount of damage. Menethai Romain Gatekeepers firing. So it may as well be now. We may as well fall upon the final stand of this settlement and try and break the defenders once and for all. Meanwhile, defensive position, still waiting. Wardens of the North in a good position as well, still have ammunition. They were used earlier on, but not to a huge extent, so that's fine. Witch-Ram Scourge Raiders. There are unit bandits here, but we're largely going to ignore them. Knights of Numenor still hiding in the trees out there from earlier on. They took a bit of damage, but they're still healthy enough to be a real problem for us, potentially. Witch-Ram Blackguard moving forward. Definitely don't want my General's Bodyguard unit to be attacked by them, but they're still in perfect health. A unit that the defenders will not be all that happy to see moving towards them. I've got my Gundabad Guard guarding the rear, supported by Coltfell Maidens, so the Knights of Numenor can only do so much to us from this angle. Meanwhile, we're ready to continue moving his army forwards as well. There's a few routing units on the docks. Trolls of Gundabad also down there, following on from their support in getting Nevin's army through the back end of the settlement as well. Nothing much going on over here. Trollshore axe throwers are fighting something? What are they fighting? Nothing is the answer. How thoroughly bizarre. Gatekeepers still biding their time and waiting. Meanwhile, over here, the idea once again is to lead the way with my BAR-I-Wides. 242 on the healthier one, there's only about 60 left in the unhealthy one, but regardless, lead the way with them. Keep the attack going for a long period of time. Wardens of the North firing away. And they are going after my witches, so I'm going to have to get them behind cover before they get ripped apart by armor-piercing projectiles. Witch-Ram Pikemen also, yeah, this was a little bit of a weird thing, which we actually missed, but the Royal Court of House of Rhudaur kamikaze charging into a unit of Witch-Ram Pikemen, which were fully ready for them, so rip, I guess. Avondale Spearmen are waiting, going to be supported by some of the crossbows. WK's Mercenary Guildsmen are still here, which will be useful against the Angmar forces that remain. Minhiriath Archers going to be firing at the Angmar on the approach. Going after the Wargs, I mean, I don't know if it's actually necessarily worth going after the Wargs, but I don't know what else you can be efficient with using basic archers like this. We shall see. Anyway, once again, we're going to be the first to engage in melee with our foes. Barrow-Wights and Essenmoor's Troll Hunters leading the way. Very depleted unit of Minhiriath Sharpshooters is not going to be enough. I mean, a little bit into the final 10,000 frames at this point, so the attack on the final defensive position has begun. With my garrison footmen going to move into position to try and keep the Barrow-Wights at arm's end. It will take a very long time for basic pikes to kill the Barrow-Wights, but the Barrow-Wights also can't really make much in the way of progress. I've got my very depleted unit of Hammer Guard in there, but 8 of them is still going to be enough in this kind of context to actually give us a little bit of an extra damage dealing edge that we may need. Essenmoor's Troll Hunters up there, and here we can see as well Mevin going to be getting underway over here as well. This is going to be perhaps a little bit more aggressive than he's been able to be in this fight up until this point. Throwing axes, shooting into the Minhiriath sharpshooters that are in behind. They may have higher terrain, but that actually does mean that throwing projectiles can find their marks a little bit more easily than they would otherwise be able to do. Brandline Berserkers are biding their time as well. Bandits ready to rain javelins down from on high. A few flaming projectiles here, trying to make the most of Rhudaur's morale maybe being somewhat suspect. Ah yes, and my Warg Skirmishers are going to move forward still with a bit of ammunition, so they're going to join in with the good times that the Trollshore Axe Throwers are having here, and throw some javelins into the supporting Cardolan units just to again keep that damage we're dealing up on Cardolan. And I can see that the Axe Throwers are handling the skirmishers in behind very adequately, so I'm going to go after the unit of Minhiriath Men-at-Arms that's just in front, spread the love around a little bit, and do even more damage to Eclipse's army. So that's something which he is going to have to continue to withstand, and again, it's very hard. When the attackers are able to still bring the pain with ranged units in the late game, it can be very, very hard as defenders, but the defenders have got so many sort of armor-piercing projectiles left themselves that we are still perhaps in a bit of a bind ourselves. And here we can see lumbermen, they rout very quickly under the weight of trolls and infantry supporting them. I mean, it's only the Snarger Stalkers, but Wargs are here. Avondale Spearmen going to be ripped apart by trolls really very, very quickly. So this very kind of a pointless defensive line, this one in many ways. Maybe it keeps them further away so you can use your skirmishers in a slightly more efficient manner, but effectively 2 units have been thrown under the bus there for no great gain. Over yonder, attacking artillery now. Going to be able to get a bit of payback, myself and Medexa now, for the pain that we suffered at the hands of that trebuchet earlier on. Going to be able to use our own catapult, and that is going to be enough to cause over 80 Minhiriath spears to rout, which is exactly what we want to be seeing as the attackers. Another example of Cardolan's slightly weaker mental fortitude acting in our favour. With my garrison footmen approaching the front line as well. Barrow-wights, victory seems certain. Got my other unit of Barrow-wights back there as well, which I can commit forward. Still got a unit of pikes, depleted unit of orc fellas, and my blackguard as well, and my witches. But ultimately my army is starting to run out of extra stuff I can commit. Medexa as well, very much in the same boat. Artillery trying to go down the line here of the Minhiriath men-at-arms. I've got my other unit of walk skirmishers now as well, but they are shaken. But already having used the entirety of my javelin payload, I'm going to leave and try and use my walk skirmishers in another position as a mass pushing tool. Artillery, can it get a good hit? I mean, it's getting friendly fire more than anything else at this point, which is unfortunate for us, but exactly the sort of thing the defenders will be hoping for as we move over the main residence in this settlement. Goblin band moving in. The mechanical clank of the crossbows, going after Goblin Band, which is a very bizarre choice, but at this point just trying to dump as much of your skirmish ammunition downrange as you possibly can to try and blunt Angmar's fangs here, I suppose is the idea, but I think Angmar will be all too happy with seeing Goblin Band be the target of crossbow bolts or infantry. Moving forward. Here, defensive trebuchet in position, so Eclipse going to try and utilise his artillery. So once again we're going to have to accept the fact that artillery is going to be the sort of thing that we are going to have to deal with. Gundabad Guard moving forwards. Attacking and defensive artillery. Bandits. Nice hit there into my Witcher-Round Pikemen once again. Oof, and a nice hit into my Witcher-Round Blackguard as well. A bit more of a tragedy, to be honest with you, as the battle gets more and more chaotic. The Blackguard are the sort of things that I want to be doing the business. I have moved my Witchers forward in a bit of an attempt to shoot at the Wardens of the North, because I realise they're right there, they're proving to be a real pain. But it's proving to be a little bit more difficult than I would like. Angor's not in my favour, Witcher's not cooperating, but Gundabad Guard moving onto the front line, so the Wound Raider beginning his assault over on this front line as well. Minhiriath sharpshooters with their armour-piercing maces won't be too out of place in facing off against a unit like the Gundabad Guard. Trolls, a little bit more depleted than they once were, but they're still certainly the kind of unit that is going to do quite a lot of damage to the majority of these. I mean, armour-piercing on the Minhiriath sharpshooters, sure, but all of their support from stuff like Out of Ammo, Arthedain marksmen. This is another opportunity here for trolls to do a lot of damage. And I think just in general, all three of the troll units that we've seen, to greater or lesser extent, more so from the Wound Raiders' perspective I have to say, have done really, really well in terms of kills. Definitely paying for themselves, and in the Wound Raiders' case I'd say more so. Still using those sharpshooters to pretty good effect. I mean, we softened up the support back here that Cardolan are deploying, but they're still able to utilise stuff like their sharpshooters to do a good amount of damage. The rest of Mevon's army is now finally on the warpath forwards. Still a little bit far away, a little bit confused as to why all those units are still back there, to be honest with you, but he's moving them forward there now, so better late than never, as they say. And we're still in the ascendancy, and at this point it is looking pretty... yeah, I mean, we're 10% ahead. I mean, there's still a fair amount of both armies left, to be honest with you, as far as the whole package goes, but obviously we're going to see things develop pretty rapidly here, and seeing as we already have a 10% differential, it's going to be pretty difficult for the defenders to fight their way back from a situation like this. Need to be careful of friendly fire here, to be honest. Witcher-Round Blackguard taking another hit from the trebuchet, so before my Blackguard have ever got into melee, Eclipse has really ravaged them with that trebuchet, but again, at this point it doesn't really matter, because I mean, we're just going to the idea behind our approach at this point is we're just throwing everything we have into this defence. They may be able to kill us off, to be honest with you, but the more resources they commit over here, which they might have to commit quite a lot, the more it's going to open the door wide for Mevin and the Womb Raider to just move forth. And I think this is fairly evident actually in the level of quality that the units have been sent over here to try and stop Angmar at. Out of ammo archers, basic men-at-arms, basic archers that still have ammunition, but it's not enough. And they've got some Tharbad Warhammers on the way now, but ultimately attacking with reckless abandon is actually exactly what we want to be doing at this point. Black Wolds from Mavin moving forward, that armour piercing, their Berserker status, going to be able to rip and tear their way through this unit of Minhiriat sharpshooters. Elsewhere, Greenway units that are routing. Bit of friendly fire, but also hitting the enemy as well. And like I said, from this point onwards, that is definitely a trade that we would probably take. Most of the units I have left are Barrow-wights, most of what Menex have left, Dunman Pikemen. There's also some Trollshot axe throwers back there, and of course his catapult. I've got my Gundabad guard waiting and guarding that catapult because, well, I think the Knights of Numinous, to be honest with you, have already been, have already retreated. But they are still buzzing around, being an annoyance. Witcher-on Pikemen moving in. I've got my Witcher-on Blackguard in melee finally, after they'd lost at least a good 2/3 of their unit to Eclipse's Trebuchet, but they're in melee now, contributing to what we are trying to do. Still Minhiriath archers firing away, sharpshooters trying to do their thing. Again, the witches, you can actually, my witches, it's probably already happened, but they were actually killed by the Wardens of the North before I had a chance to actually utilise them. So you can see the duality of what the witches are actually capable of accomplishing in this battle. The Womb Raiders have been very effective at, you know, doing critical damage to 2 front lines at 2 points in the battle. Mine basically were useless. They killed off 3 Greenway Garrison footmen. Certainly not worth the significant amount of florins that you have to pay to have the witches in your army. So it goes to show the good side of the witches and the bad side of the witches both together. But from an attacking point of view, the fact that we were able to use even one of them well is obviously a good thing for us. Finally, Eclipse's pesky Trebuchet cut down by Mavin's Black Wolds, claiming my vengeance for me. And that was where his general was, interestingly enough, but there are worse places to put your general, because if your artillery is getting caught out anyway, you've done something horribly wrong regardless. Coldfell Maidens moving forward through the gap, and that's exactly what I'm going to be doing with my wargs as well. This front line, pushing up through a defence position that's this narrow and this steep is really, really awkward, but we are able to do so now. And of course, Barrow-wights being the main constituent of my army, they don't really have mass as such, which is unfortunate for us. Coldfell Maidens here, Blackguard finally going to engage with the Wardens of the North, but they're still far healthier than my Blackguard, so they would actually win that fight 1-1, but we're just trying to engage with them to prevent them from being the menace that they have been up until this point in the battle. Nine Rangers. Again, maybe it's a little bit too little too late, I think, to be utilising Rangers like this. Haven't really noticed them up until this point in the battle. Chongs were, of course, killed off pretty quickly. I mean, it's possible we have taken Ranger Fire, and I just haven't noticed it either when I was playing or now, but I think that says it all, really. I mean, if we had noticed taking Ranger Fire, it's because we were taking a lot of damage. So maybe too late on the draw, maybe a little bit too clumsy with their Rangers, and that has been one of the main reasons why momentum has been building in our favour ever since we cracked through those initial 2 outer defensive positions. The defenders have always been scrambling a little bit since then. There goes my general, cut down by a Warden of the North, unsurprisingly given the situation, but again, seeing as most of my army are Barrow-wights and they're going nowhere, my general is kind of a useless appendage at this point. Rhudaur swordsmen marching forwards. Coldfell Maidens' defeat seems certain, being engaged by Morris's Trebuchet crew. Again, we're still struggling to push our way up this hill, so my warg's going to try and do the same thing that the Coldfell Maidens did, again using them as more of a mass pushing tool than anything else. Arthedain marksman routing. Trollshort axe throwers. Throwing projectiles in there. Still some Dunedain Troll Slayers in here actually. Just trying to cause this battle to be as chaotic as possible at this point, because if we do that, there's no way the defenders will recover, and some of the defenders are starting to admit defeat. So of course, at this point, it's very obvious that we as the attackers are going to be victorious in this fight, and once again, one of these battles for the war in the north goes in favour of the Witch King's host. Still some Coldfell Maidens there. Plenty of these Rhudaur swordsmen still here as well. So Medex's army in better shape than mine. I think, to be honest, of all the attacking armies, mine's in the worst shape. But again, that's what my army was built to do, and it's what Angmar in general are built to do to a large extent. Another Cardolan general falls to the Black Waltz. And really at this point, Morris's Troll Slayers and his Knights of Illuminus are really the only things left to crush underfoot. Yeah, we pulled out a fairly substantial lead here in the late game. I mean, it was 10%, within 10% for quite a while in this battle, but towards the very end here, we've really pulled out a very impressive lead. So it's not really a close battle. It was reasonably close for a long time in it, but then they were unable to withstand our attacking might for too long. And again, a large part of that was just the Wound Raider and Mevin had far too much in the late game for them. Knights of Illuminus going to run away now from the Witch Realm Inquisitors, so this is ironically where the Wound Raider's cavalry is actually going to come in handy. Going to be able to hunt down these stragglers. Guardians of Cardolan. I mean, to be honest, Guardians of Cardolan are going to be pretty bad against Troll Slayers. I'm going to send in my Warg Skirmishers as well, just trying to send everything in. Obviously, really we're just feeding kills into the Troll Slayers to a large extent, but it is what it is. May as well throw what's left of my army under the bus. There go the Knights of Illuminus. I think they're going to try and go this way to charge into something. But yeah, there's Dunman Pikemen ready and waiting for them, so it's not really going to be up to all that much. There's still some of my Witch Realm Pikemen actually as well. 71 of them remaining, another one of my surviving units of stragglers. Going to advance downhill into the Knights of Illuminus. And naturally, with a rear charge from the Witch Realm Inquisitors, that's going to make very quick work of them. Broken and fighting to the death, which means the last unit left on the field going to be these Troll Slayers. But I think he admits defeat before they actually get killed to the last man here, because we are into the final 200 frames. But still, a fun battle to be a part of. The first battle I've actually been a part of in quite a while, and it was good to be a part of one again. Obviously, as I've said to people who have asked me to join battles before, I'm very often not around for them. And even when I am, on the weekends, such as now when I'm recording this very battle, I can't really... After recording, I don't want all of my weekend to be devoted to one thing like Medieval 2. I want some time to myself, given how busy my job is and how heavy my workload is. But yeah, it's one of those things where I really want to get back into playing this more again, so I can be part of more battles such as this. But yeah, I mean, hopefully, like I've mentioned a couple of times later on in the year, that opportunity will present itself, but that's something that we're just going to have to wait and see about. Anyway, having a look at the kills, I got the least, which is not too surprising given what the initial idea behind my army was, and rather gratifyingly, Medexa got the most, so it goes to show that the interplay between the Angmar and Rhudaur armies was working as intended there. Again, most of my damage dealing potential was bound up in a couple of units like Scourge Raiders and Hammer Guard and the like. Most of my focus was on stuff like Guardians of Cardolan and BAR-I-Wights, and it worked. The BAR-I-Wights were certainly effective for me as the battle wore on. The Wound Raider getting a decent amount of kills. Mevin, less so, but again, he had to be a little bit more conservative against Eclipse's defensive position, so he got most of his damage dealing done actually in the later stages of the game. He was having to take the slower approach for most of the rest of it. Morris got a lot of kills, which is not too surprising given the fact that his Wardens of the North were effective, his Trebuchet was effective, all of his ranged units really. His melee units, they held the line, but they were always fighting an uphill battle against the weight of force that myself and Medexa were able to deliver to that front line, even with WK support as well. And Eclipse, very much in the same vein as Mevon, most of his army was only truly activated later on, due to him having to wait for Mevon to truly commit to attacking. Regardless, let's see what did the damage for both of the Angmar armies. So you can see here 500 kills from the Witches for the Womb Raider, goes to show how effective they can be. One of the main reasons why this battle ultimately snowballed in the way it did was the Witches being able to be used that second time on that defensive position. If not for that, I still think we would have come out victorious, but it would have been a far closer affair than it ultimately was. The Trolls as well, obviously proving themselves in melee very nicely, going into those big blobs of infantry and doing a lot of damage. Trolls of Gundabad especially getting over 300 kills is very good. Witchram Inquisitors actually did quite well, I would assume, from rear charges into Eclipse's army, and then later on also taking advantage of the havoc that was ensuing. Most of the basic units actually, performing either exactly as you'd want them to or actually underperforming from the Womb Raider, but again, individual units performing well above what you'd expect them to more than makes up for that. As for my army, more of a uniform thing is what you'd expect here, and that is indeed what you see because of a lot of the Guardians of Kharn. One of them actually breaking over 100 kills, which is impressive. The Barrow Whites, it's more the damage they took, which was the important thing. From my perspective, Blackguard not doing very well, but again, Eclipse saw them and dealt with them very quickly. The same can be said of my Witches, which got 4 kills, of course, because Morris saw them and dealt with them quickly. So, unlike with the Womb Raider, most of my effective units were seen coming and ultimately dealt with by the defenders. So, it's how you know the defenders weren't playing badly, really. The fact that they were able to diffuse most of what I was doing from an attacking perspective. And in the end, all I could really be is a bulwark for Medexa to do his thing. Pikemen doing okay. Hammerguard actually doing quite well as well, considering the pressure they were put under. And like I said, the Trolls, they were put into a position where they were able to get a fair amount of kills pretty quickly, but in the end, I think, again, that was a bit of a misstep from me. 110, not really enough. I mean, you could say that it forced the defenders to commit more units further forward, which were units that died in the earlier stages of the battle, which could have been used against us later, but I think that's reaching. I think maybe I should have saved my Trolls for a little bit later on, and then they maybe would have been as effective as the Womb Raiders. But yeah, big thank you to Eclipse 2500 for inviting me to this battle. It was a good time. And a big thank you to all the players as well for making it possible. It actually was a lobby that filled up pretty quickly, which is always one of my main concerns when I join a game like this, is how long they take to get going. Not the case this time around. So yeah, nice to be a part of. And moving forward, got a few other battles in Reforged that I can do. We're going to be making a return, as we often do, to Bersergath at some point in the next couple of weeks. I would suggest into March. There's a couple of other battles in Reforged I've got as well. I've made my way through all of the Silmarillion replays I have lined up so far. There's still the thing I've been meaning to do, which is the top 5 spear infantry in Rise of Mordor. And then moving further forwards, like I said, we're moving into the great unknown there, because there's a lot of variables that can happen throughout the year. But like I said, at the very least, we'll be maintaining the current level that we have. So it is what it is. Big thank you to everyone else. Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.